them to do things, you can drive awareness as much as you like, and you can tell them what the action is as much as you like, and nothing will happen. So going, there isn't enough action, we need to pump up awareness, expecting to jump from here to here, which is the politician's failure quite often, isn't going to work if you haven't got alignment in the middle. Sometimes you get NGOs who are effective at doing this, and they can specify the action, but they don't give the people the way to act, and then nothing happens. That's not usually the problem with businesses. So that's a very simple motivation sequence where you're taking people down that emotional journey and it reaches a magic point in the middle, usually by showing them victims, the cause, the enemy, demonisation, the solution. When you've got victims and an enemy, people get concerned, it may be a tragedy, but if it's avoidable, it becomes a scandal. So this is the magic point where people get angry, and that's when you can get them to take action. So the basic rule of using this is to work backwards from the opportunity and then think, how can we create this before it? In other words, to work out what your opportunity is and then work backwards and then take people down this journey. So what they see is this, what you've done in planning is that. There's a horrible diagram, but we're showing that sequence as a series of steps. So it's what you see, what you feel, the internal steps, the process I talked about earlier. The point about this is supposed to show that these are jigsaw pieces. So one bit has to fit with another. So if we're going to say something is a solution, it has to fit how we've defined the problem. So if I say global climate change is melting the Arctic, you should ride a bike, that isn't a solution to melting the Arctic. It's a solution to something to do with getting from A to B. Because they're framed at the wrong level, that they don't fit together. They're relevant, yes, but a bike on its own, you riding a bike on its own isn't going to do that. So you've got to have a much more tight fit between the solution and the problem. Otherwise people may understand what you're trying to do, they may sympathise with you, they may agree with your ultimate objective, but they're not going to take a particular action that you want them to take. Now you might say this is a complex issue, and I'd say all issues, when you get to know them, are complicated. No doubt running the LSE is complicated. No doubt the design of glasses is complicated once you get to know enough about it. Like the London Underground, 273 different stations, factorial of that possible journey. It's an impossible thing to communicate to anybody. So number one rule is don't try and communicate the issue in a campaign. You can educate people about an issue, like you could here. Maybe take 2 days, maybe you take 2 years, maybe take 10 years. Education's a great thing, but you can't use it to do campaigns. In German they have an expression, finding the red thread through an issue, and that's what you have to do if you're going to construct a campaign within the issue, say, of climate change. Decide which bit you're going to change and how you can change it, and then just base your campaign about that. And communicate it one step at a time. Which also means that you don't explain the whole kit and caboodle to people from beginning to end. They see first that bit. You go through the motivational sequence for that. Once you've done that, you do the next one, the next one. It's like an event horizon, sort of performance at each stage. Like going one stop on the tube. And the construction system that a lot of campaign planning is based on, copied from the oil industry originally, is critical paths, which I'm sure lots of people know, where one thing has to happen to lead to the next. So it is not a calendarised sequence of things we'd like to happen, or that we just do. It has to be based on one thing will actually cause the next thing to happen. So essentially we start off by saying, what we want to do is to achieve this particular end, and then we ask what will make that happen, and then what has to happen to make that happen, and then what has to happen to make that happen backwards until we get to a place where we are now. And if we can't make that chain, then we can't construct a campaign instrumentally to make those things happen. 5 minutes. Now here's an old example. Actually, I won't go through that example. We haven't got time. But what this does is to create a series of objectives or steps in, say, reaching the end one you want to get to. That one has to happen, then that one has to happen before it, and that one. Where you've got activities that drive the change between the events, And that will tell you which audiences you need to reach, and that will tell you which messages you need to use, and that will tell you which media to use. So this creates a sort of skeleton communication strategy of event, driver, event, driver, event, driver. What you can't do is to start down here, which maybe some well-meaning groups often try and do. So they say, let's have a leaflet, we're very concerned about this. Why? Well, we've got a leaflet dispenser. Or let's have a video. Or nowadays it might be, we haven't tried texting or whatever the thing after blogging is going to be. And then they try and fit it to what they want to happen. And that doesn't work. You just end up with a large number of reports left under your desk or something. Unusable because they're not driving the change that you want to achieve. Here's an example of stories. Small girl, close brush with death, wolf. Everybody knows the story. Here's the same information in a different format. Now, which one's going to be more memorable? I mean, sometimes you have to use this sort of format, but if you don't have to use it, then for God's sake, use the other one if you possibly can. You can come to, I think we're probably getting towards the end of what I'm going to say to you, but I did a lot of work a few years ago with the Home Office on drug strategy, and we had a lot of problems with ministers coming in saying we need effective communications, we need effective messages, and then you get these very circular conversations about what this actually means. So we went back, and drugs is a very, very, this is legal drugs, is a very, very well-researched evidence communications area, much better than climate, for example. And that's because it's been a big political priority, a lot of money has gone into it, and after you finish locking people up and seizing what fraction you can seize, there's not much else you can do to encourage people to do things like get into drug treatment, except for communications. And there were millions of pounds worth of evaluated studies of projects. We identified 7 different things that could make a difference. It's CAMP, C-A-M-P-A-T. The context, where the communication arises. For example, the anti-smoking messages are targeted at people, well, relevant times when they're going to go out clubbing, say, or go to the park. People are going to smoke, but they're going to smoke because they enjoy it. It's a very bad time to tell them not to smoke. A much better time to tell them, a different context, is after they've been out the next morning and they've drunk too much, they feel terrible. Then is a good time to talk to them. So that's an example of temporal context. For me saying this to you here is different from me saying it to you at work or in your living room. Context always is changing the effect of the communication. And often you can change the context to change the effectiveness of a campaign, or that may be what the campaign often does. The audience, you read, with all respect to my colleague here, in things like DEFRA, although they're trying to do segmentation, as Solly may talk about, you read again and again and again communication papers or hear people talking about the public, or people do this and people do that. That's always wrong. It's not people. It's not, you hear people say, what I've just done. Nobody will give up their car. Well, that isn't true. But what do they actually mean? And what's it useful to you when you're looking through a piece of polling or other research? You've got to be much more specific than that. The messenger, changing the messenger often has a huge effect. So the voice of a group like the ones who are activists here obviously has a very different effect from if you could get BMW to say the same thing, or the National Trust to say it, or whatever. Often who says it has more effect than variations in what is said. The program's why you're doing it internally, which you need to know, surprising quite often. It's ambiguous. The channel is how it gets there, which could be TV, radio, face-to-face, direct mail. They all have different properties and work for different people. Like, for example, for many years it was assumed that all young people use the internet a lot, but actually socially excluded young people for a long time didn't, so it's actually a very bad channel for trying to get to them. You often hear people talking about, oh, old people do this. Old people, a lot of very different people. And then the actual message is a combination of the action you want taken and the trigger, the motivation, the thing that will make people do it. And maybe later on I'll talk to you a bit about ways of chopping the population up into a few big groups. The people had very different motivations.